This is Land of Havilah, Ezra 6. The regional governor and his officials sent a letter to Darius questioning the Jews' authorization to build the temple. They told Darius he might want to check the records to see if indeed Cyrus authorized it, as the Jews say he did. Verse 1. Then Darius the king made a decree, and the house of the archives, where the treasures were laid up in Babylon, was searched. A scroll was found at Achmetha in the palace that is in the province of Media. Achmetha in the province of Media was in the mountains of what's now northwestern Iran. It was home to a summer palace, a royal treasury, and a library of archives. In verse 2, Darius's officials made a search there and found a certain scroll. Coming up, it was just what they were looking for, still in verse 2. And in it, this was written for a record. In the first year of Cyrus the king made a decree. Concerning God's house at Jerusalem, let the house be built, the place where they offer sacrifices, and let its foundation be strongly laid, with its height 60 cubits and its width 60 cubits, with 3 courses of great stones and a course of new timber. Let the expenses be given out of the king's house. Also let the gold and silver vessels of God's house, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple, which is at Jerusalem, and brought to Babylon, be restored and brought again to the temple which is at Jerusalem, everything to its place. You shall put them in God's house. Comment in verse 3, the scroll confirmed that Cyrus authorized the temple to be built. In verse 4, a fact we didn't know yet, Cyrus commanded, quote, let the expenses be given out of the king's house, end quote. And in verse 5, the vessels Nebuchadnezzar removed from the old temple, Cyrus commanded to be given back. So everything in the record matches up with what the Jews are saying. Coming up, Darius's return letter to his regional officials beyond the river, verse 6. Now therefore, Tatnai, governor beyond the river, Shethar-bozenai, and your companions the Apharsachites, who are beyond the river, you must stay far from there. Leave the work of this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God in its place. Moreover, I make a decree what you shall do for these elders of the Jews for the building of this house of God, that of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river, expenses must be given with all diligence to these men, that they not be hindered. That which they have need of, including young bulls, rams, and lambs, for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, also wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the word of the priests who are at Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day without fail, that they may offer sacrifices of pleasant aroma to the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and of his sons. I've also made a decree that whoever alters this message, let a beam be pulled out from his house, and let him be lifted up and fastened on it, and let his house be made a dunghill for this. May the God who has caused his name to dwell there overthrow all kings and peoples who stretch out their hand to alter the same, to destroy this house of God which is at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree. Let it be done with all diligence. Comment, Darius supports the work maybe even more strongly than Cyrus did. He completely ratified everything Cyrus said and threatened his officials with death if they hinder the work in any way or if they fail to provide expenses. He fears God, same as Cyrus. He wants to sacrifice to God and for prayers to be made for him and his family from the temple. Verse 13. Then Tatnai, the governor beyond the river, Shethar-bozenai, and their companions did accordingly with all diligence, because Darius the king had sent a decree. The elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. Comment, in Haggai 1, Yahweh said he sent the Jews drought because they stopped work on the temple. The drought came in the form of a lack of rain, crop failure, and in a failure of their other efforts. That's changed in verse 14. They're prosperous because they resumed Yahweh's work. He's not withholding from them any longer. Still in verse 14. They built and finished it according to the commandment of the God of Israel, and according to the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. This house was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Comment in verse 4, they finished the temple. It was under construction for 20 years between 535 and 515 BC. According to secular history, the kings during this period were Cyrus, then briefly Cambyses II, and even more briefly Bardiya, then Darius. According to verse 4, in addition to Cyrus and Darius, Artaxerxes made a decree concerning temple construction. This presents a mystery because Artaxerxes didn't reign until the temple was complete, according to secular history. It could be that Artaxerxes approved some additions or remodeling of the completed temple, which would reconcile everything. When the temple was complete, verse 16, the children of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the children of the captivity kept the dedication of this house of God with joy. They offered at the dedication of this house of God 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and for a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats according to the number of the tribes of Israel. They set the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their courses for the service of God which is at Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses. Comment: Moses established the priesthood to minister at Yahweh's house and the Levites to assist them, Numbers 3. Later, David split the priests and Levites into divisions as described in 1 Chronicles 23-26. The purpose was to assign them to specialties and to establish a rotating schedule. Now in verse 18, everything's back in full swing with the priests and Levites conducting temple service according to their divisions and rotations. Verse 19. The children of the captivity kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. Because the priests and Levites had purified themselves together, all of them were pure. They killed the Passover for all the children of the captivity, for their brothers the priests, and for themselves. The children of Israel who had returned out of the captivity, and all who had separated themselves to them from the filthiness of the nations of the land, to seek Yahweh, the God of Israel, ate, and kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy, because Yahweh had made them joyful and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria to them, to strengthen their hands in the work of God, the God of Israel's house. Comment: Children of the captivity in verses 16, 19, and 20 is now a happy phrase for the Jews because their captivity is in the past. In verse 20, the priests and Levites purified themselves, meaning they made themselves ceremonially clean according to the laws of Leviticus so that they could serve at the temple. In verse 20, the priests and Levites killed the Passover lambs for all Israel. In verses 21 and 22, it was an especially joyful Passover because they've returned to the land along with all who had separated themselves from the filthiness of the nations, meaning non-Jews have come to join them, forsaking the filthiness of idol worship among the nations to worship Yahweh. They have a temple again and a fully functional priesthood, all because of God. In verse 22, this is because God turned the hearts of the kings toward them and strengthened them to build. Quote, the king's heart is in Yahweh's hand like the watercourses. He turns it wherever he desires. Psalm 21:1. Ezra 7 is next.